Hello there, you awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me today for Stay Free with Russell Brand. For the first 15 minutes, we'll be with you on YouTube. I'm actually travelling back from the RNC now, unless things have gone really, really crazy. And this is just to let you know that for the next hour, you'll be able to see my conversation with Candace Owens. It will be on YouTube for a minute, but eventually we will have to turn to the sweet stream of freedom that provides us these great possibilities and opportunities. Let me know what you think of it in the comments and the chat. We'll be back with a fantastic live show tomorrow. Here's Candace Owens. In a parallel life, Candace Owens, things could have been so different. We were walking very separate paths, very separate worlds, running into each other in Cliveden. Suddenly the conversations, you eventually marry an Englishman, suddenly the conversation, weird, and suddenly the conversations of right and left all converge around Christianity.
Yeah. I actually love our story, like me and you. I just think it's amazing because we were on such opposite sides. And in a way, we've both abandoned parts of our side and realized that there's like a higher thing that's happening. And it, like, all the other stuff is just nonsense.
Yeah.
Like, and you and I have a very weird, like, just weird.
What you mimed there was the double helix DNA, Candace. And I feel the same thing. So the first time I met you, you were in the UK. You came to our house, our studio there. And my favorite bit was not on camera when I said something like, we talked about immigration, I think. And I was like, listen, but what about compassion or something? And you went, oh, we're all going to be okay. We're all going to dance around. You sort of danced around my house. And I realized there are some things that transcend left and right division, things like spirit and the spirit of play. And now, do you feel like that this is something that's happened like with you and obviously with me? Both of us have had some kind of, I don't know how you're experiencing it. I'm not projecting. I'm telling you my thing. Like a traumatic external thing, like, whoa, I'm in a tundra now. I didn't plan for this. I didn't intend for this, but this is happening to me. And what am I going to do? What's my response to this going to be? And curiously, given our obvious differences, we've both had the same response.
I know it's been very overwhelming. As how I would describe it, and I did not expect it, and I felt it building. I would probably say at the beginning of last year. And now when I look at it, obviously God was always walking me in that direction because my husband had a conversion to the Catholic faith. He studied at Oxford. He studied theology. And so he had a conversion to the Catholic faith. And I never really quite understood what was compelling him. Like, he goes to mass every day. Yeah. And and that made me interested in it because it was just such a huge part of his life, and everything we were donating to Catholic churches. I was just like, okay, what is this thing? Like, I love God, but something is moving in your life in a different way. And then things happened politically that made me sort of question Protestantism, I think. And I just started researching, and it was overwhelming. And it actually was overwhelming in the most beautiful way because it finally made it make sense. What I mean is, like, God gave me a platform, and I don't know why. I felt very undeserving of having a platform. And now it makes sense. I'm like, I was given this platform because I'm supposed to do your will. I'm not given this platform because of me. It's got nothing to do with me. And that was it was very powerful and very comforting. And like, I finally don't feel like I'm just sort of swimming in like a universe and like not really understanding like what the purpose is. I know what the purpose is now. It's always been God's will.
Like, we'll still talk about politics, I figure, but having both of us embarked on different journeys, it as I'm sure it must, reframe the whole way you relate to the political discourse. For example, we've noticed that your content has moved from being on the frenetic 24-hour cycle that many YouTubers will be familiar with. What are the clips? What things are trending? What am I going to say about this? To a sort of a deeper analysis of history. Who determines what history is? Who decides what narratives prevail? And while you've been doing that, Candace, are you aware that it's in some ways comparable to the sort of postmodern ideas of historical relativism and of course there's the trope that history is written by the winners, but also there's a kind of Foucaultian idea of history as archaeology, that you can mine different seams of history. History is not just Napoleon did this and George III did that. History is diverse, diffuse, nebulous, and it seems that that's something that's interesting you, in particular when you've talked about genocide and the American genocide and Hitler. And I can't work out, Candace, knowing you as I do. I don't, and I mean as I do, like to a point with I would say a degree of connection and understanding, but we've not spent loads of time together. I sense in you previously you are a provocateur. But I also sense that you are genuinely very, very curious about quite profound subjects, and you obviously occupy now an incredibly unique space. So can you tell me what that change in particular is, moving to deeper and longer forms of analysis, what's happened there, and how you relate that to postmodernity, for example?
Yeah. So what I would say is that I'm a provocateur in the sense that the truth is provocative. The truth is provocative enough. You don't need to actually add anything to the truth. You just have to be willing to tell it. And most people are not, because when you start arriving at truth, and I'm talking about, I always thought I was chasing truth. Like, Black Lives Matter, it's fraudulent, they're taking money. Okay, that's a little truth. But what is the truth? The truth, you're at the Bible suddenly, right? And then you start to realize that these people are not attacking Donald Trump. They're not attacking this. It's not about racism, sexism. It's always been about Jesus Christ, right? It has always been about Jesus Christ. That is the person that has always been attacked. And so for me, there were things politically that I would say catalyzed the inevitable leaning of me into the Catholic faith. And one of the things was just, as you just mentioned, like genocide, right? I was severely propagandized in school. Everyone was, depends on where you grew up, but we were severely propagandized into this. Now I look back and it's an absurd belief that the only people that have ever experienced genocide, it was World War II, it was done by the Nazis, and it happened to the Jews. And what that does when you are traumatized in a classroom, and I'm saying traumatized for a reason, because these are Soviet tactics to introduce very heavy, scary concepts to a child, traumatizes them. Thomas Sowell wrote about this extensively, how the Soviets recognized this, and it leaves an indelible mark on your mind. And so it transforms you into a person that defends things in your life that you don't even comprehend, right? You have a trigger friendly, suddenly something happens in Israel and you're just like, Israel can do whatever they want. I don't care what Israel does at all. And actually what I'm doing is I'm responding to a trigger, a childhood trigger of this fear that's been instilled in me through the 3 years of programming about the Holocaust, right? There's no question that what the Germans did, what the German Nazis did was horrific. All things that are done in wars are horrific. But then as I started looking back and I stumbled across that BBC documentary, which I am challenging every person to watch, The Savage Peace, and I recognized that a Holocaust was committed against the Germans during peacetime by the Allies. It ripped me into a new universe. Shocking. Children lined up and shot for the crime of speaking German. These were not Nazis. They did not vote for Nazis. This took place in the modern Czechoslovakia. And to hear the Czech citizens talking about what happened and how they were basically, this was done, and a large part of our conditioning in America is to make it so that we never peel back that onion and recognize what we were doing. 12 million Germans were ethnically cleansed. These were innocent Christians. They had nothing to do with Adolf Hitler. They were removed out of their homes. Their belongings were taken. They were lined up. They were shot. And then speech laws were passed so that they could never talk about what they experienced. I have friends in Germany today. They're telling me that my clips are going viral and it's like a quiet conversation. The news won't cover it. And they're just so grateful because, and a German friend with me shared what happened to his ancestors during this time. And I said, how did you never share this with me? There's a fear of talking about what actually happened because of this version of history, which is very slim. And if you question that narrative, which I have done and I'm doing, and because it's important for us to know the whole truth, and I want to talk about the way Christians were persecuted, which for some reason really deeply upsets people when you talk about Christian persecution, they will attack you with everything that they have. I am being attacked every single day, and I've never been more clear, more happy, and have never felt more strength and more certainty in terms of what I'm doing.
I think, Candace, that when you say that there are unexplored and seldom discussed narratives when it comes to ethnic cleansing or the extermination of peoples. The example you just given of German-speaking people in Czechoslovakia, it is interesting that that's an argument that's also used by people with regard to this particular issue on the diametrically opposed side. In that recent debate between Mehdi Hussein and Douglas Murray, both of whom I think are extremely well-equipped communicators, Douglas Murray uses the idea that anti-Semitism in the sort of common dialectic highlights Israeli war crimes in a way that, this is of course not only his argument but a relatively popular argument in defending Israel's actions, if that is indeed what the function of the debate is highlighting Israel's actions while ignoring sort of Muslim violence on other Muslims or the genocides in Syria. Now, so when we say that the Holocaust is but one example of genocide, that genocide is not an event that was unique to World War II. I think all of us are kind of peripherally aware of the Uyghurs being sort of persecuted and executed in China, or the sort of the various Congolese massacres and the Tutsi people, or like, very across the continent of Africa. We're aware that genocide appears to be a part of human history. Are you saying that in some way, and in particular, the idea of Holocaust and genocide has been appropriated and used to facilitate Israeli foreign policy? And if that is what you're saying, I wonder how we look at, for example, as a British person, Britain's role in the balkanization and rebordering of that region, the Balfour Treaty and the Second World War. Because if we're going to start looking at various narratives, which I suppose we must, then how is it that we find truth there when there are so many, it seems to me at least, potential truths?
Right. So one of the things that I did when I started becoming interested in this and recognizing that I had been severely lied to, and it was in large part, again, due to that BBC documentary, The Savage Peace. It's excellent. It's very hard to find, but I've shared it on my Twitter for people that are looking for it, is I wanted to make sure that I was reading sources that would not be deemed anti-Semitic. So I started reading Israeli historians, and I was very shocked to discover that Theodor Herzl wrote in his book, this is a person who's hailed as a hero, that he would kill as many Jews as he needed to get Israel established as a state. That was just something that he felt was a sacrifice that needed to happen if Israel needed to become a state. And, this is long before World War II. I think, absolutely, just to be clear, that genocide and Holocaust has been appropriated to further Israel's interest. There's no question about that. Right now, there's a clip of me going viral. I did an entire episode talking about the German genocide and the German Holocaust, and I raised one issue in that episode, which people should be confounded by, which is that if Israel is the state that needed to exist, as we are told in America, because of the Holocaust, because Jews needed a home, and because they were put into concentration camps, then why is it that a Jewish man who ran a concentration camp in peacetime and mass murdered Christians in Czechoslovakia, why is it that that man was protected by the state of Israel, even though he was wanted for war crimes? This is just a fact. I just shared it on my Twitter as well. He was protected by them until the day he died. There's a lot of criminals who mass murdered Christians who were protected by the state of Israel. If you have a right as a Jew to know your history, and I don't doubt that you do, I believe that you do. I've learned your history in the same way that you've learned it. I understand that learning your history is traumatic. It was traumatic for me to learn it as well. Please do not stop Christians from learning their history. Why don't we learn about the Bolsheviks? Why don't we learn about Henryk Yagoda? He was the greatest mass murderer of the 20th century. He was putting Christians into gulags. The Bolsheviks were beheading priests. They were burning down churches. I believe that Christians in the West have been propagandized against Christians in the East. And when you start to look at World War II history through the lens of Christianity, things become quite shocking. The amount of, cathedrals that the Allies bombed at the end of the war due to bad intel. You may have seen that I did the Charter Catholic retreat, the pilgrimage, hardest thing I've ever done physically. but you eventually walk for 3 days. And this is another example. And that cathedral is still standing because there was an American general who, when he was given intel, bomb it, there's Nazis inside, he thought that the intel was weird. And he volunteered himself to go behind enemy lines and to actually look into the cathedral. And it was wrong intel. And that has happened a lot. That happened a lot. Why were Germans firebombed on Dresden? Dresden was an objective war crime, but why were they firebombed on Ash Wednesday? Why did we drop the bomb on Nagasaki? We're not given an answer for that in American classrooms. They're just it's this sort of nebulous, well, we had to end the war. We had to end the war by dropping a nuke on Catholics praying in Nagasaki and wiping out the entire Catholic population. Am I wrong for knowing that? Yes, that's what they say. You knowing the history is what's wrong if you step outside of the bounds of what we put into your textbook. Well, I'm stepping outside of those boundaries. I am demanding to know more, and I'm spending a lot of time studying, and I want other people to be encouraged to pursue truth, not what is being told to you in a classroom that is being run like a Soviet propaganda cell.